So we've mostly talked about wine, right? Now we're going to look at table grapes. So you don't have to memorize these numbers. I'm going to go through a lot of them fairly quickly. These numbers are getting a little outdated here, 4-year-old data. But you still get the general trends of, who are the big people, the big companies, or in a country, excuse me, in the table grape world. And just because of their sheer size, China is almost number one in everything. There are very few commodities China's not number one just because of population. And India, similarly, their huge population tends to put them at the top of the list. Excuse that interruption. But Turkey, table grapes. Turkey, I would not have thought of Turkey as a massive table grape production region. The EU, Brazil, we're way down here. The United States, we're not as huge in table grapes. We get a lot of our off-season table grapes from Chile, and they do more than we do. Very interesting, plus a lot of others. Lots and lots of global production of table grapes, popular item. So ripening, we've already talked about that. It is not any different in concept than in wine grapes. Now, we haven't talked about the hormones, the auxin-ethylene relationship. Ethylene is a ripening hormone that is a gas when it's in the air, but it dissolves inside of liquids like the inside of cells. And it's the kind of thing that you use to ripen tomatoes or bananas. They make their own naturally, but we can give them a little extra, stick them in a truck container and just put a little extra ethylene in the air, and that causes things to ripen. So for example, bananas, you harvest them green as can be, give them a shot of ethylene gas in the air that they're stored in, and wait the necessary period of time, which isn't very long, and then they will be kicked into full ripening process, and within a few days, depending on the temperature, boom, you got yellow bananas. It's the same concept with a lot of fruits. Just bananas are an easy one to picture, and they are constantly being picked green and gassed, and that's actually fine. All of the flavor components of a banana is already in there when you pick a banana, and so gassing it with a naturally occurring ethylene is perfectly safe, and you get a product that tastes as good as if you picked it right off of the banana plant. Tomatoes, not so much. You pick a tomato green, and you can still gas it to get it to turn red, but it'll never taste like if you picked it red. That's why vine ripened is actually the way to go. Conventional versus organic, I think it depends more on variety. Organic versus conventional really isn't an issue in flavor. It's the variety. Some varieties taste wonderful and some varieties taste bleh, even if they're vine ripened. And organic producers tend to be a little more conscious of picking varieties that are more flavorful. And anyway, get off that sidetrack, because it doesn't matter if we're talking tomatoes or bananas, which are both berries, as are grapes, another berry. Did you know that? All three of them, bananas, tomatoes, and grapes, are all berries, and they are all ripened with this ethylene and hormonal auxin response. There is a material called ethrel, which is an ethylene generator. Because ethylene is a gas, and I can cause ethylene gas to be generated in the air. I can buy tanks of ethylene gas and release it into a chamber or storage container. But ethrel is ethylene in a liquid form with a molecule to keep it from coming out of the liquid. But when it gets into the cells of a plant, the stabilizer molecule or portion of the molecule comes off, and it generates ethylene in the cells. Now, a chemist would shoot me for wording it that way, but I think you can picture what I'm talking about. You have this molecule with this little ethylene group hanging off of it, gets in the cell, the ethylene comes off, now you got ethylene in the cell, and boom, you have just triggered the ripening response. So you use this 250 part per million ethrel, you get improved color, quality, and uniformity in ripening. And uniformity in ripening is crucial in table grapes. Color, visual appearance, blemish-free, everything ripe at the same time. It's a different world than wine grapes. Wine grapes, you don't care exactly how pretty they are. A little bit of ugliness is no big deal. They're going to be crushed and turned into wine grapes. Table grapes, you've got different considerations. So we use this ethrel to get the ripening more precise and improve table grape eating quality. So what do? We look at sugar and acid, just like we do in wine grapes. We look at color, and the sugar-acid ratio should be between 20 and 35 to 1. 20 to 1 is a somewhat sour grape, a tart grape. 35 to 1 is a very, very sweet grape. International standards in the United States, Europe, UK, they have a minimum sugar levels in the 15.5 to 17.5 range, again, for adequate sweetness and customer satisfaction. You don't have to memorize these numbers, but you know that's a low number for a lot of wine grapes. Wine grapes are higher than 15.5, but wine grapes also are matured to a sweeter point because you're after sugar to turn into alcohol, right? Cultivar differences are very great, so these numbers are totally dependent on the cultivar you're growing. Am I growing Thompson seedless or some other type of table grape? But those are general numbers. Here's the Thompson seedless sugar to acid ratios. Again, don't worry about this, but Thompson seedless have a pretty high sugar to acid ratio, way up there at almost 33, as opposed to something like a Beauty seedless way down there at 17.5. So they vary quite a bit in what the flavor expectation is. The sugar acid ratio is going to dictate a big chunk of the flavor component. And it's a ratio. Remember, that's a ratio. That is not directly the Brix. You got to put the two together in order to totally understand what is the sweetness, tartness of this, the sugar acid ratio and the Brix. So the refractometer, we already know this. I can skip this. You know, a refractometer measures sugar, measures Brix. Here's one of the refractometers. They're different white grapes. All of these grapes are considered white grapes. You have the green, the amber, and the yellow, but they're all considered white. The red grapes, you go from pink to red to dark red, almost black red in some cases, but these are the red grapes. And then we have the true black grapes, Autumn Royale and Midnight Beauty, and they're not really black. If you diluted that color, you'd find out it's not really black. It's just so dark that it is called a black grape. And where you draw the line between black and super, super, super red, well, if you can clearly see that it's a black color with a red hue, it's generally called red. If it looks like the last picture, you call it a black. Local market versus export. What are the differences? Why should I think differently about the two? Well, this was a presentation to some table grape producers, and so they talk about the differences and the different markets. But from some of the grower standpoint, your local market, you've got harvest to sale in a couple of days, but harvest and sale on the export market can be quite a wait, 7 to 30 days. And so you need a good transportation system, refrigeration and cooling system in place. Your cold chain has to be really good for the export market. The ideal situation, you want to retain your peak condition. Harvested grapes must be transported as quickly as possible. And you want it cooled rapidly to get the field heat out of it. And again, you can do that partially by not letting them get hot in the first place. Pick early in the morning, pre-dawn even, late at night, if you've got a heat problem. Fast cooling should be followed by storage at 0 to 1 centigrade, just barely above the freezing point of water, with very high humidity. You do not want them drying out. So you got 90 to 98% humidity. And you need airflow and good atmosphere in order to keep things post-harvest problems from causing damage. You don't want things molding. And in these high humidity conditions, things can go bad without proper atmosphere and circulation, even though you're at a very cold temperature, which does slow things down. That's to your great benefit. The mindset for export, what are the main challenges? Number one, decrease temperature as fast as possible after picking. And in most US markets, that's not a big deal. We have cold chain systems in place. And I would say from the people I've known over the years, you go back into the 70s and 80s, there were still a lot of problems in cold chain. By the 90s, a lot of attention went into it. A lot of those problems were finally fixed. I think so many people are concerned about it. And some of the food safety challenges that happened in the early 2000s, I say in the US, we got a damn good cold chain management. But that's not true of the rest of the world. And they've got some problems. And this is an audience, I can't remember where the audience was for this originally, but this is an international audience. Modern packing facilities, cooling, hygiene, and handling, don't need to go into that. Modern cooling and transportation facilities, you've got these massive containers. Some refrigerated containers are designed to go directly from truck to ship, to go internationally from Chile to the United States or whatever it is. Importance of temperature. There are metabolic changes, the physiology inside the grape berries. They're alive. The cells are alive. They're respiring, just like we are. When we say respiration as a human, we often think about breathing. But that's not the respiration we're talking about with grapes, or even cellular respiration within our bodies. Our cells burn sugar to have energy. That's how they live. And by putting them down to 0 to 1 centigrade, just at the edge of freezing of pure water. Now, this isn't pure water. Remember, the berries have sugar in there, so they have to be a little below 0 centigrade to freeze. So you're not going to freeze them at 0. Pure water freezes at 0. Sugar water in a berry, you got to be a few degrees below. Anyway, you're causing that respiration rate or the burning of sugar to go way down. You're also causing ethylene production to slow way down. And you're avoiding problems with changes in texture and the aroma and other things that can cause problems. But you need to get temperatures down. Transpiration, they're living, they're breathing, they're exchanging moisture with the air. So again, you want it not only cold, high humidity, so the loss to the air is very low. Mechanical injury, that's a problem. Physiological disorders and decay, microbial growth, primarily fungi and sometimes bacteria, can do serious damage leading up to harvest and in post-harvest. Cold chain management, you need to have it all the way from harvest. A good harvest plan, harvest the product when it's cool, get it cooled down to storage temperatures around 0 centigrade, and once it's cooled, get it into its temporary storage to stage it for shipment. And you want to stage it, get it into a truck, get it onto a ship, get it to a grocery store, wherever it's going, as fast as you can for that cold chain system. Now, you also want to use a refrigerated loading area. Again, that's something I think we've managed to do in most of the United States on larger scale production, but a lot of times you've got these smaller operations and they've got the cooling area, then they've got this warehouse, and then they've got the loading dock, and they're all three separate things. And so cooled berries are sitting out on the loading dock and they might sit there for 2.5 hours before they finally get into the truck. That's not good. And in other countries, that's exactly what happens. If it's going to the local farmer's market, is that a big deal? Probably not. If it's going for the export market, that's a huge deal. 50 to 75% of the storage life in some of the produce is spent inside a truck or transportation of some sort. Understanding the grape, extremely important to know what happens to the bunches after they have been harvested, because then we know what we can do to prevent fast deterioration of the fruit. Grapes do not ripen after harvest like some other fruit, bananas and pears. It only deteriorates. So it's not going to improve the, quote, ripening processes, but there are still deterioration processes. So tomatoes are kind of in the middle. Tomatoes can ripen color and ripen some of the texture, some of it, but once it's picked, you fixed certain things. Bananas, pears, they ripen completely. Grapes, you got to let them ripen on the vine, period. You harvest them right. And luckily, they're firm enough at ripeness for at least the table grapes that they can handle the transportation. Wine grapes are often softer because they are more mature, and there might be some mechanical damage a little bit between harvest and getting them to the crush pad. But what's the first thing you're going to do to them? Crush them on the crush pad. So a little bit of mechanical damage is different in wine grapes. But the aim is to limit deterioration from whatever process. You don't continue ripening. They just get worse. The moment you pick them, they're at the best they can be. And it only gets worse from there. And that's the way you got to look at it. High temperature and low humidity after picking will cause water loss from the stems and berries, and that increases the rate of deterioration. And another quickie break.